between the quote and the rest of his paper. So he follows the quote with several sentences that return to the focus of his paper.
Notice that the first sentence after the quotation continues the quote's thought about peer pressure. Nathan follows this sentence with a return to the subjective nature of his classifications which the paragraph opened with. Then it returns to the focus of his paper, social groups. So it backs up his thesis and connects his choice of the quote to his paper. It connects peer pressure to the creation of social groups.
All right, so that covers integrating a quote and how to properly paraphrase a passage. You integrate a quote by creating a smooth flow between your words and the quoted ones, as well as showing how the quote connects to the subject of the paper. A good paraphrase retains the author's ideas, but none of his or her words.
The next thing we're going to discuss is writing a good conclusion. Like we said earlier, what you write about in your conclusion depends upon the class for which the paper is written and the assignment. But there are a few things you can do with your conclusion to make it better.
For most academic papers, you want your conclusion to return to your introduction and thesis. The best way to do this is to go back to your introduction and thesis and look for specific statements or ideas which you said there. Then, in your conclusion, try to say them again without repeating them exactly. Your introduction and conclusion should be like bookends of your paper. It's important for your reader to believe that you've said all that needed to be said about the topic of your paper in between the introduction and conclusion.
A good strategy for tying together the introduction and conclusion is to set your introduction and thesis statement next to your conclusion and try to place key words, ideas, or images from the beginning of your paper into your conclusion. An additional thing you can do in your conclusion is leave your reader with a powerful image or emotion that relates to your topic. By leaving your readers with this image or emotion, they're forced to think about your topic after the paper's finished.
Let's look at Nathan's conclusion. His conclusion does 3 specific things in order to tie it to his introduction. He also ends his conclusion with a personal anecdote.
Now let's discuss the 3 points Nathan makes, which link together his introduction and conclusion.
First link.
First, Nathan reaffirms that his observations are based on his personal experience. The sentence in the introduction reads, "I will blatantly classify particular peer groups based on my experiences in public high school." The opening sentence in his conclusion is, "The classification of these groups is rooted in my personal experience and is most likely biased and inaccurate to many." He's reminding the reader that all the groups he describes are based on his own experiences in high school.
The second link.
In his introduction, Nathan argues that peer group formation occurs across racial, gender, and economic divisions, blah, blah, blah. Nathan made the point that kids in high school divide into groups everywhere. This wasn't some kind of spooky phenomenon that happened only at his school.
So Nathan's going to say this again in his conclusion. Whether or not my classifications are skewed, peer group formation does exist. Then, Nathan backs up this argument in the conclusion by using the anecdote about the torn jeans fad as an example of the power of peer groups and the pressure they apply.
So Nathan's reasserting that other people have made the same observation as him. His opinions are supported by others.
The third link.
A third thing that Nathan does in his conclusion to refer back to his introduction is to use key words from his introduction. Let's look at the sentences from his introduction.
The sentence in his introduction is, "The formation of groups among high school students serves both to draw distinctions between who is in and who is out." Now look at the sentences in his conclusion. "Regardless of my subjective experiences, one thing is true. Across the country, in high school after high school, these pressures are creating social groups, defining who is in and who is out." So Nathan has gone back to the key words in and out. This serves as a reminder to his reader of his introductory remarks and the argument he's making, that social groups in high school exist and are very powerful. This sentence refers back to a line in his introduction.
Let's look at one more element that makes Nathan's conclusion effective. Remember, we said a good conclusion leaves your reader with a strong image or emotion. Nathan's using a personal anecdote to do this.
Nathan, why don't you tell us about your personal anecdote?
Well, I was leaving the library with a few books under my arm when one of my old high school friends met me on the quad.
Hey, are you rushing too? Oh, don't tell me you're becoming a nerd.
I just wanted to do well my first semester.
Yeah, that's what I said. A nerd. Think quick.
You know, that guy and me had some good times in high school. I remember one time we both checked out library books on the same day, and we had this little competition going to see who could keep his book out the longest. we got in some trouble for that. I guess we just went in different directions.
So Nathan's going to end his paper with this personal anecdote. Let's look at his conclusion.
First, Nathan introduces his quote. Take me, for instance. In high school, I was a confirmed member of the fledgling middle class. But now that I'm in college, the pressures are such that I'm doing things I wouldn't have done there. Then Nathan tells the personal anecdote. This new ending works well because it leaves the reader with a lasting image. Nathan's high school friend calling him a nerd. This ending also shows what high school group Nathan was in. This ending leaves the reader with a fresh perspective on the subject.
It's a masterpiece.
Right on, man.
So overall, Nathan's conclusion is good. It's good because it refers back to his introduction, thesis, and argument, but it does so without merely repeating what was said in the beginning of his paper. The quote from the article offers a slightly new spin on the topic that interests the reader and broadens the scope of Nathan's argument, while at the same time reaffirming it. The final personal anecdote leaves the reader with a strong image in his or her mind.
All right, so you feel like your paper's almost done. You're happy with your thesis statement, your organization, and everything else.
So, what's left?
Well, now you need to look at the small stuff, like any grammar problems you might have, or typos. Like it or not, your teachers and employers are going to judge your writing by the little mistakes you make. But grammar, well, that's a whole other can of worms. Oh, and there's one other thing we need to mention, and that is you should spell check your paper on a computer.
Remember, even a monkey can use a spell checker, so you can imagine that your employers will be mad if you don't use it.
And just remember that there are words you can misspell, and the spell check will miss them, like there, and there. Spell checks only look to see if you've correctly spelled a word, not if you've correctly spelled the right word.
So a careful final proofread of your paper before you print a final copy is indispensable.
Quiz 4. Watch out, Quiz 3. Here comes a little something called Quiz